Hello YouTubers, I want to welcome you to another edition of Bargain Bin Gear. And hopefully you're liking and subscribing to the videos, because I often refer to older videos and it's an easy way to find them. Alright, now, in this episode, we're going to take a look at something that's quite historic for me anyway. And I'll tell you the whole story. Basically, I recently renewed my website, dtguitar.com. Okay, and basically kind of have to redo my website. And, well, one of those things, and I'll leave a link to it specifically if you want to go check it out. And basically, on the website under the music link, okay, there's something called the mp3 timeline. Wow. And the mp3 timeline is basically an assortment of little audio clips of kind of my development as a guitarist from 1979. I think is the earliest one on there. I have one even earlier that I haven't even posted yet. I should do that too. But anyway, 1979 all the way up to the basically my first album, which was 1999. Modern Rock Guitar Volume 1, Abducted by Aliens. Wow. That was my very first album. However, up until that point, I had been making all kinds of demos and trying to play with bands and those kinds of things. Well, it turns out that I was also making a bunch of demo tapes. And, well, it turns out I still have a lot of those recordings. Which is how I came about making the mp3 timeline. And, it comes out right now to about 50 tracks. And I just, basically redid that page last night, so I thought I'd share some of them with you if you have any interest in that. It's basically how I kind of developed as a guitarist up to that point. And in 1979, it's a long story, but basically I got my first stereo system. Wow. Not only did it have a phonograph record, 2 speakers, and a built-in tape deck, so I could make little cassettes and things. Now keep in mind at the time, it came with basically an album, which were kind of like, kind of a greatest hits album. They had, you know, things like Music Box Dancer and the theme to Shaft and those kinds of things. And, well, I was devastated when my older sister told me that that album weren't, the tracks on there weren't done by the original artist. And I was like, what? And I had gotten, you know, just because I saw the cover, I had gotten one other album, and that was the soundtrack to Star Wars, right? Which was a, you know, at the time, a big deal movie. I mean, I think I'd seen it in the theater for, you know, 13 or 14 times, you know. Well, anyway. So my goodness, in 79 I was how old? Oh, So I was 10 years old. Right? And later on in that stereo, you know, I made little cassettes and things. And discovered ABBA, which is a big deal too. But anyway, so what I would do is, I guess, and you'll hear the clip that, well, you know, at 10 years old, my voice hadn't changed yet, right? And so anyway, you know, I pretended to be a DJ on the radio. I don't know. Anyway, you can hear some of it here.
1979 Corporation. I hope that you like this tape. And now for another song. And now more songs coming up. But first, for one special song, Star Wars. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this tape.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so anyway, that's the very first clip in 1979. And, well, when I was young like that, I, basically, I don't know, I may have had a little acoustic guitar or something. I was just starting to get into guitar. But besides that, I had this little, it was kind of like almost like a portable tape deck. And I realized that if you hit buttons a certain way, it would make kind of noises, basically, you know. And I don't know, it had a built-in little microphone or something. And while I was messing around with it, trying to get some sounds, I don't know, just to mess with it. And I guess my little sister was there too at the time. Okay, wait, it's called Noisemaker. Here it is. It's the second clip. Okay, so anyway, I'm not sure when that was, but it wasn't much long after, so it was probably, I don't know, 1980 or something. So anyway, and here, by this time, I remember I had the acoustic guitar, and I was playing in a park or something. And a guy comes up to me and said, "Oh yeah, you should write some songs, you know." And so I attempted to just hum a song, you know, I don't know, with acoustic guitar. Okay, let's see what else is on here. There's a bunch of them. Now here's one where we had tape deck distortion, and by this time I had switched over to electric, and my friend also played electric. And to be quite frank, this may actually be him playing electric and not me, but I don't remember. Basically, it's just to show we were using this tape deck, and we could overdrive it to get distortion. I mean, we didn't have any pedals or anything. This kind of thing. Van Halen had Eruption with the, the little tapping solo, right? Of course, everybody knows that. But at the time, it was fairly new. I remember I was on the swim team in high school, right? So I had made one similar, I thought at the time, right, that had tapping in it. and instead of Eruption, I called it Volcano, of course. So here's some of the Volcano stuff. Tell me that doesn't sound exactly like Eruption. Yeah, in fact, I came up with Eruption first. You can hear it. No, just kidding. Alright, so that's pretty sad. Volcano, yeah. Now here's one kind of interesting. As I recall, I had a friend, Brian, he would come over and he played keyboards mostly, and I don't know, I had gotten some kind of processor, and well, you just have to hear it. It's called No Noise, and I complain about the noise and how I need some kind of noise suppressor pedal or something. You can hear it here. Sad.
What I want to get is a noise limiter so that we don't get all that noise. How loud should these players?
And one thing to notice there, if you'll notice, when I start playing the rhythm, the high gain rhythm, what I notice now is well, I had no timing whatsoever. It was sad. And in fact, to be quite honest, when I was taking lessons and things and practicing and so on, I thought, okay, I got the scales down, arpeggios down, and chords down, but I just had no rhythm whatsoever. Now eventually, I kind of developed rhythm, but at that time, when you first start learning, you don't have rhythm really. And one of the best things I ever did was to get a little drum machine. And that did help me develop my rhythm. In fact, I'm going to skip some of these. Yeah, here we go. So my very first drum machine was this really old drum machine. It's basically kind of out of you remember those old organs things, you'd see them in the mall and stuff. And you'd play kind of the organ. And, well, this was called the Korg Mini Pops drum machine. It was about that big. And basically it was out of an organ, basically the drum section out of an organ put in a box. And you can hear it. So here I am practicing my rhythm. Anyway, so I did that for, man, a long time. Jeez. Just trying to develop my rhythm things. Yeah, now here's one where I had a bassist friend named Byron, and he would come over and basically, this was kind of my Jimi Hendrix phase, you know, so I'd play kind of Jimi Hendrix stuff, kind of. Basically, at that age, you know, especially as I was just starting to play, really, they should have taken the whammy bar away from me. Right? But, yeah, that was my Jimi Hendrix phase, you know, trying to use the whammy bar and things, you know. Now here's my first multi-track demo. Right, because a guy had loaned me his little 4-track, multi-track little cassette, multi-track, you know. And I mean, this was a big deal. And in fact, I remember going to my local Radio Shack to buy some little Radio Shack cassettes to make my demo. Keep in mind, by this time, had come out, right? So I tried to, you know, use some Yngwie Malmsteen licks and harmonic minor and all that business. And what's interesting is, from what I remember of it, I think this tape is sped up a little bit. It's a little bit faster than I remember it. You know, I don't know if I did that or I don't know. But anyway, I'm just telling you. And you can hear it on the tape. Anyway. Remember, by this time I was taking lessons, and what you're hearing there is a processor that really, man, changed my guitar life, if you like. And the story is this: it's the Roland GP8, right? And at the time, it had just come out. And I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, about an hour from where I am now in Bloomington. And there was a trade show, right? Similar to kind of like NAMM, but on a much tinier scale. But they had a Roland GP8. And man, it was amazing because it had all these little pedals and things, and it could be 8 pedals at a time, but it was in a rack mount unit. Unbelievable. It was like $1,000, which for me at that time, at that age, you know, I mean, my goodness, $1,000, well, that's astronomical money, you know. But I remember I worked all summer selling newspaper subscriptions, right? And man, did I sell newspaper subscriptions, right? To sign up, I think it was like the local paper, the Herald Times, and then the Chicago Tribune, you know. So I basically went to campus, IU campus, sold all these students subscriptions, right? And, well, by the end of the summer, I had basically $1,300 I made. And of course, what did I buy, right? The Roland GP8, of course. And it left me $300 over. And they kind of conned me into buying the guitar synth, right? Which was also a Roland rack mount unit. And it could do all kinds of stuff. But unfortunately, the synthesizer they sold me was pitifully bad. It was a Casio, and it had like 4 sounds instead of 6, you know. It was junky. In fact, I have a recording of it here. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah. Guitar synth demo. Here you go. This is the guitar synth they conned me into buying. with the guitar synth anyway, because I was just learning. But I had gotten the Roland GP8, which is what you heard on this multi-track demo, right? When the guy loaned me the little 4-track unit, so I had the GP8, and that's what you hear. Anyway, okay, now this one's kind of sad because at the time I think it was Brad Gillis, Brad Gillis, and he was showing off the Floyd Rose tremolo, right? And one of the things he could do with it is make it sound like a car, right? And so of course, I had my GP8, and at the time I think it was a white Fender Stratocaster, or maybe it was a Squier Stratocaster, I can't remember. Anyway, but it had a tremolo thing, and well, I discovered that if you turn it up or something, it would kind of feed back and make kind of a car sound. So I made a track out of it. You can hear it here. Just that's the car demo, But for me, it was a big milestone because recording-wise, it's a kind of one of the first times where I actually made a multi-track recording that was, it wasn't great, but that sounded like a track, Now, eventually, as I mentioned, I had outgrown the Mini Pops, Korg Mini Pops drum machine. But what I discovered with it, because that got kind of bored, it's pretty lousy. However, I discovered that you could press 2 buttons at a time. Probably weren't supposed to, but I pressed 2 buttons at a time, and you get a complex rhythm and things, And, so here's one. It's called Korg Mini Pops Hell. Here you go. Surprising is when I listen back to this stuff now, I'm surprised at how much I was influenced by guitarists and bands of the day, And one of them was Van Halen, surprisingly. I had no idea. eventually I had called up a music store, right? I forget which one it was. It was, I think, a pretty big store in like New York or something. And I told them I need a multi-track recorder, right? And I have $150, right? And the guy on the phone says, "Man, we have just the thing for you." Right? I mean, I hadn't picked out a multi-track. I didn't know. I just wanted one, right? A 4-track on cassette, you know. So they sent it to me, and it was this little, well, it looked like a tape deck. So, yeah, it was a little tape deck is what it looked like. But sure enough, you could record 4 tracks. Now, it didn't really have a mixer. It just had, each track had like a volume knob or something. You know, I wish I still had that unit, but anyway. So I learned to use that, and I used it for quite a while, you know. This was pretty cool to me, anyway. And so I started recording tracks, songs, if you like. You know, and you can hear one of them here. So I recorded, you know, kind of songs like that, just, you know, ideas really. Okay, well anyway. Oh my goodness. Alright, so eventually at the same time, you know, I was taking lessons and things. In fact, that by that time I think I was doubling up on lessons, taking more than one. And what I discovered is that for it to really, that stuff to sink in, you know, it took years, right? So I wasn't a very good student, I have to say. Anyway, but I cataloged all the lessons, you know, that eventually I would learn, but it would take years, you know. And luckily I had a good teacher, Chris Having. You know, he was a really good teacher from South Africa, I think it was. Alright. So anyway, he told me, "Man, you have to get into bands." I go, "Okay." So I got a band together, and we were playing in my basement. I guess this is just off a jam box, I think, recording. Yeah. Yeah, here it is. Now this is an original that I wrote. It was pretty sappy. But, well, I had the GP8, right? But I couldn't afford, like, the amp section, the power amp. But what I did have is the neighbors across the street were throwing out this old stereo. big consoles, you know, it looked like a piece of furniture. And so I grabbed it, you know, they were throwing it out, so I took it and brought it down to my basement. And what I discovered is that on the back it had an input jack, right? And so I would use that as the amp. So I had the GPA going out to the amplifier. And I had gotten a little band together, and here's another one. Same band and same idea. The GPA through this console. Here you go. Remember, I was a big Rush fan at the time. Well, yeah, I was a big Rush fan at the time, so he was very Rush influenced. Alright, now, so I had a little band together, and I thought, man, we should get a singer, right? Well, we got a guy, and I mean, the guy was the nicest guy, okay, but I'm sorry, he just couldn't quite sing, really. But he wanted to be the singer, so yeah, okay. And I actually have a recording of it. An original one, you can hear. Well, anyway, obviously that band kind of fizzled out, right? I mean, I don't know if he even, yeah, I think he had a microphone. I don't know. So basically, I kept making demo tapes and those kinds of things, right? Okay. And so, of course, you know, using the whammy bar and so on, you can hear So, remember, eBay was a big deal back then, so of course I was trying to, you know, do my harmonic minor licks and things and sweep picking, and which I really think I did sweep picking incorrectly, you know. Anyway, it was sloppy, whatever. Alright, so later on I made another band, and this was just another drummer. We didn't have a bassist, though. So I just played. And unfortunately I had, you know, I didn't really have a speaker cabinet. So what I did is I took a Celestion G70 or GM70, something like that, speaker, and I put it in a milk crate. Right, so I could be heard when I played. This drummer was quite loud. You'll hear it here. Well, of course, that was a terrible idea because eventually I blew up the speaker. It didn't. Milk crate, it doesn't make for a good speaker cabinet. Anyway, but here it is. See.
Another chord. Yeah, another chord.
And so eventually I got another drum machine, a new drum machine, and you can hear it here, the Alesis SR16, I think it was. And that was a big deal, you know, we retired the Chord Mini Pops. So, kind of a modern drum machine. Okay. And by the way, that does remind me of a song, actually, which I didn't know at the time. I had no idea. But it sounds very similar to that song. I forget who sings it. Anyway, so that was the new drum machine, yeah. Just going through some of these. Oh, geez. Alright, here's another band, and this time we're playing covers. So, of course, I wanted to play Rush, Limelight. So I tried that. also played other covers. What do we play? The Police stuff, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix stuff, of course, and Van Halen, I think it was. So it's the same band in my basement playing other covers. We didn't have singers or anything. Right, there's a Van Halen song. Of course, some Jimi Hendrix stuff. Anyway, and then there's some Pink Floyd. Basically, it was a drummer, a bassist, and me in my basement. Still playing the GP8 and that console. Yeah, worked out okay. And I was still messing around with the recorder, the 4-track recorder. Yeah, now this is with Brian, the keyboardist. Now the drums on that was all his keyboard. It was huge, big keyboard. Anyway, yes. So then, at the time I was listening to Bob Marley, Peter Frampton stuff, you know. And so I spent the summer recording, I remember. This kind of stuff. What I remember about that track specifically, hold on. What I remember about that track specifically is that somehow I got conned into buying a Kitty Hawk tube amp, little combo amp, little Kitty Hawk combo amp. You know, and well, I didn't know anything about tube amps, and for all I know, I could have hooked it up wrong or something. And well, basically, I had gotten another little band together, and we did a recording. And this wasn't in my basement, but I had that little Kitty Hawk amp, and I swear the thing caught on fire. It's this one. This jam session. anyway, that little tube amp caught on fire. I kid you not. It was terrible. Started smoking and stuff. I mean, wow. So obviously it was either set wrong or I don't know. I couldn't tell you to this day. Yeah. So I had switched from the Roland GP8, which had kind of, you know, gone out south. The new thing was the ADA MP1, right? Tube, a little preamp box. It was a rack unit, right? And man, the ad had Paul Gilbert playing the MP1 preamp. So man, I had to try one of those. So I did. You can hear it here. ADA MP1, and I remember with a friend of mine we had dream books, and they were basically little notebooks, and we would draw out like dream setups, you know, what kind of cabinet we would have and what kind of amp and thing. I think there was a Mesa Boogie tri-axis, and one of them was the ADA MP1. Okay, yeah. Now, at that time I had gotten a job with a friend of mine, and basically they gave us a leaf blower, and it was at night, and well, I guess after the movie, it was at a movie theater, and the movie theater was shut down. And at night, and they wanted us to go through the aisles and blow the popcorn through the aisles to the end of the theater, right? Which we did. I mean, you know. And I think my friend was at one theater and I was at another. And I think the theater was situated in a mall, and so we'd blow the popcorn. Well, I had done a little recording and, you know, put it on a cassette, of course, a little 4-track demo. And man, I had a great time in that theater because I'd bring my boom box, set it up at the top of the theater as loud as it could go, and just play my demo, you know. It was quite an experience, really. And this is a demo. I still have it. See where that feedback guitar would hang over the clean sound? Well, typically, you know, obviously I ripped that off completely off of the Rush Limelight. If you listen to Limelight, there's a place where he feeds back a note, right? And then underneath it comes back with the rhythm. So I guess that's what I try to do. Led Zeppelin. I think Led Zeppelin 1, the very first one, anyway. Yeah, now here's a band, kind of, that I recall, and for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, but the drummer, I guess, wanted to fire the bassist. I don't know why. I had nothing against the guy. I thought he was pretty good. So I called this one, let's get rid of the bassist, question mark. Like, what? I don't know why, but here's the tape I had recorded of us practicing or whatever. So that was the band. I think the bassist was fine. I think eventually, well, we probably fired him. And later on, I went to play with a band, and sure enough, who was the bassist? The guy who got fired here. Believe me, so he got me back, and so I didn't play with that band anyway. Okay, now here's something interesting. By this time, I had gotten a proper little 4-track, Yamaha 4-track. But I think the amp I was using was just the PV, like 210 little stereo chorus amp. And of course kept making demos. Man, that's one thing I would always do, is keep making demos. So here's one. So basically, I would just make these little demo At this time, I had gotten a job as a just a guitar teacher, and well, they had a recording studio, and I was hired my very first studio session. Right, I have a recording of that as well. As I recall, when I played the studio, you know, the guy who wrote the song basically said, "All right, now for the guitar solo, I want it to build." It was the idea. Start out slow and build. I was like, I don't know, whatever, I'll play. So I tried. So anyway, that was my very first studio experience. Wow. It was a big deal for me. It was fun, you know. Though I have to admit, I didn't like playing on other people's stuff. Basically. So this one, I think it's first digital multi-track recording. Let's hear that. You have to understand, this is where I had gotten the Roland VS880. Multi-track recorder, and it was digital, all digital. I mean, the mixer was digital, the recorder was digital. Unheard of, really. Unbelievable. No reel-to-reel, no, that was over. It was a digital recorder. And so the sound quality was really, really good, at the time. In fact, hasn't really changed all that much, except now it's mostly done on computer, but... And it's quite a story, really, because at the time when the Roland VS880 came around, it was $2,500 too, And I remember I had a job, and it was American Musical Supply, I think. And I tried to basically to buy one, and I think make payments on it or something. So they had to check, make sure that I could afford it, basically, But I had a job and things, working on computer stuff. So they went ahead and let me buy it, and it, man, changed my life. I love that thing. The Roland VS880. Up until then, it had all been done on cassette, which the quality wasn't very good sound-wise. Okay. And in fact, this is really what led to my first album. Now, keep in mind, at the time, Steve Vai came out with an album, I think, Flexible, yeah. And it was all done in his old home studio, But I don't think it was digital like the VS880, right? But that's what I had always wanted to do, was to create an album just with a little 8-track recorder, and use drum machines and things. Now, I had this plan to record an album. Don't ask me why. I just wanted to, I guess. And right before I bought the VS880, right, because it hadn't really come out yet, I went ahead and bought an 8-track reel-to-reel. I think it was a Fostex, right, with a mixer, separate mixer. It was reel-to-reel with reel tape. And I used it, and the sound quality was okay, but it wasn't like the VS880, which came right out. So I sold that reel-to-reel right away and bought the VS880. However, not before I recorded 2 tracks, which I re-recorded on the VS880 for the 1999 album, the first album, Modern Rock Guitar Volume 1, Abducted by Aliens. So this was a one called Winter Passage, and this is the Winter Passage track off the, not the digital one, off the VS-80, but off the reel-to-reel before I sold it. You can hear it. The sound quality is okay, I guess. And remember, this was recorded in a little one-bedroom apartment, you know. And I have one other tape or recording off that reel-to-reel before I sold it. I got the digital VS-880, and I re-recorded this one as well. And here's the one off the reel-to-reel. I used the flanger. Now eventually I re-recorded that one and got it more solidified, and that track is Adrenaline, and it's on the first album, of course re-recorded on the VS-880. And man, the very first thing I did is I took that recording off the VS-880 and took it to a community radio station, and believe it or not, I recorded it off the radio, and you can hear him trying to find it on the knob, and I have a recording of it. Of course, he misspelled my name. He called me Dennis Tafey or something like that. I don't know. It's Dennis Tafe, not Tafey, or anyway. But here it is. Here's same song idea off the reel-to-reel, but this is done on the VS-880 digital 8-track recorder.
that. Before that, heard from Dennis Taff. And that was a song called Adrenalize.
Dennis Taff. Sad. Okay, now, here's something interesting, too. I have, okay, after the first album, which was a conventional album, you know, just recorded off the VS-8, but one track at a time, you know, go back, listen to it, rewind, play over it, and that kind of thing. But by that time, I had discovered looping with the Boomerang looping pedal board. Which I thought was the greatest thing ever. And I still do. I mean, all my stuff is loops these days. And improvise on the spot. Let me improvise, you know. However, I was already at work on my second album, right? And I'm sorry, but the looping, I just scrapped the whole second album and did a looping album, you know. And it's called Modern Rock Guitar Volume 2. Forget the name. I don't know if it had a name. It may have, I don't know. Anyway, but here's what album 2 would have sounded like. And it was basically the same kind of thing as the VS-880 digital recorder. Okay, now keep in mind, Eric Johnson, I had heard Eric Johnson, and I loved that kind of violinish tone that he had, you know, in soloing. So, and you'll hear it here, that kind of emulate, maybe not as playing, but I tried to get that kind of violinish tone, you know, so you can hear it here. Notes panning from left to right, and that's basically a clear rip-off of Randy Rhoads, you know. Anyway, is, the cassette that it was on would kind of skip. I kid you not. The song is actually a little different. But the other thing is, and this is what kind of killed the second album, is I tried to sing on these tracks, and it was just awful, terrible singing. And that basically killed my singing career. I was like, man, forget this. It's better as an instrumental, you know. Anyway. Another song, and I kind of screwed around with the drum machine. This is the third track or whatever. So that's me going on the little drum machine. So anyway, the idea was to, you know, heavy rhythm guitars and then kind of mixing distorted sounds with clean sounds. You know, and you can hear the Rush influence, Randy Rhoads, God, even some AC/DC in there. But what killed it is I tried to sing on these, and man, I'm just not a singer. Sorry. Sad. Anyway, I liked it. The instrumental track, it would have made for, you know, pretty good instrumental album, I guess. But I was much more interested in doing the looping stuff. Well, the second album is called Alien Guitar Volume 2, basically. However, what you heard there would have been Volume 2, but instead it's this looping album, you know. And in fact, all the albums from then on are looping albums, except for the first album, which is Abducted by Aliens. You know, it's a fitting debut album, if you like. And it's got 15 tracks. Yeah. And now I'm up to, what, volume 414? That's, yeah. And of all those albums, except for the first one, so I guess 413 albums are all looping albums, except for the first one. You know, the looping album is a lot more fun for me. You know, I mean, there's cons to it, I guess, because it's hard to repeat songs because they're all done, you know, improvised on the spot, so you can't really recreate them all that well. You know, compared to the tracks on the first album and what would have been my second album, you know, are things you can go back and play again, basically. Okay, anyway. So there you go. That's the MP3 timeline. And there's still some tracks that I haven't put up yet that should be in there, I guess. You know, a lot of them are kind of studio recordings where I was hired to play guitar. There's some of that in there. Oh yeah, and of course my very first recording ever, which was actually done at the basement of a church, and I was playing acoustic guitar. I just, you know, picked it up kind of at school over there, little tiny school. It was a church school, I guess. And so I was playing with like 20 other guitarists, you know. And quite frankly, the thing that I recall was right before we had to play, one of the girls who played guitar, I guess, had passed gas, and everyone was laughing. Right, so that was our first concert. There you go. And later on, I had to play guitar in the, I guess, church services and things, right? And I mean, I was, you know, I haven't even played a year. And I remember my fingers were so small I couldn't make a G chord, you know. And I remember after playing one of the numbers there in the church, I remember a nun came up to me and told me, it's better if you don't play on this one. Or anyone after that. I guess I wasn't very good. But yeah, I mean, I'd really just started playing. Anyway. But eventually, you know, I kept making those demos and things. And I mean, you know, Guitar Player magazine in the day had the Mike Varney spotlight columns. And he would encourage guitarists to send in demos, right? And like in the magazine, they would publish 3 people with really good demos and things. So I always would send one in. I sent one in, you know, hoping to be get in the magazine, you know. But instead, they had people like Sean Lane was one, Yngwie Malmsteen was another, I think. Paul Gilbert, of course. I think. Anyway, but I never got in the spotlight column. Yeah, it's alright. You know. But anyway, I kept making demos, and I remember, what was it? Who was that did that? It was in New York, and they were looking, I guess, for a guitarist to record an album with them. So I sent them a demo and things, you know. I got a letter back saying, reviewing it and saying, yeah, it's okay, but, you know. And eventually I think they got Blue Saraceno to make an album for them. Anyway, but the funny thing is that I remember I went to New York, right? Because my sister was there, right? So I stayed a summer there, I think. So I went to New York, and I kid you not, I called the, oh, that's what it was, Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine, right? And so I remember I had called Guitar for the Practicing Musician after just sending them a demo tape, and them sending me basically a kind of rejection letter. However, it was gosh, I wish I could remember the guy's name, but it turns out he had just interviewed Randy Rhoads, which was pretty cool. I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, but I remember I called them up and I said, "I'm here." I didn't say it like that, of course, but I thought they'd say, "Oh yeah, come on down and we'll show you around the guitar, stuff." No, not at all. I was really naive, I think, as far as that goes. But that was my time in New York, And I remember I tried to play in some bands in New York, and it was, well, they gave me a demo tape to learn the songs. I don't know what key it was in, but it wasn't anything I could play. I didn't know what it was. It never worked out. And then I remember I went to some studios, and I guess they're practice halls. Yeah. And as opposed to where I was in Bloomington, Indiana, a lot of the musicians weren't really helpful to other musicians. Whereas there in the practice halls, people were loaning amps and stuff. They were pretty nice. Anyway, that was my experience in New York. But I think it's funny now that I think back on it. Here I am! Right? Oh gosh, if I can remember the guy's name. And he wrote me back a letter with a review of my tape and said, "Well, the last one sounds like a dead jam." And he told me to slow down, and because at the time, you got to remember this was in the late '80s, '90s, where speed was everything. Oh man, what's the guy's name? Anyway, so I remember, in fact, I have it on my wall. I have the little review of my demo tape. Man, crazy. And I remember I sent it was either a demo tape or an album to Eric Johnson. And he was really nice. He sent me back a postcard. Wow, that's on my wall too. Anyway, so there you go. That's my development up to that point as a guitarist, And, for all the, I wouldn't call them failures, but but of the recordings and things, it really did prepare me to record my first album, So there you go, that's it. And I hope you go to my website and go to the mp3 timeline and take a listen, because there's a lot of it that I skipped for this video. Anyway, I really enjoyed going back and making all those little audio clips and things, which really I got from my older website. So basically kind of recreated the website for the mp3 timeline. That's it. And I think what I should do is a gear timeline of the different amps and things that I went through. Because I can remember quite a few of them. And guitars as well. Okay, so anyway, that's the dtguitar.com mp3 timeline. You know, and Jesus, you know, those are, it's pretty old now, but what is it, 25 years, 26 years ago that I made my first album, if you can believe it. My goodness. You know, and for me, man, it meant everything, you know. And I mean, I had gotten an endorsement with Jackson Guitars and, you know, kind of stuff. Yeah, that was a big deal. So anyway, I guess the moral of the story is, for me anyway, whatever level you're at now on guitar, whatever you do, don't give up, you know, just keep playing it and try to learn from every experience, that's all. And keep playing, that's the most important thing, I think, you know. And for me now, I've been playing for quite a few years, and well, I still learn stuff all the time, guitar-wise, you know, and music-wise. But boy, back then I was kind of determined, you know. And I mean, it took me a year to make, I think they made 1,000 albums of these. And unfortunately I still have a box of them. But I mean, I even had a thing going with a pick company, and so each CD would come with a pick inside the CD. Anyway, that's a totally different story. And I even went to a studio for them to master the studio, and man, that was the greatest, for me anyway, to be in a real studio. Wow. You know, because up until that time, you know, I'd just been in my apartment. It's quite funny to think about now. So it was a big deal back then. Alright, very good. Anyway, I will see you next time. Okay. Bye.